Can open bezels be filled with epoxy resin instead of UV resin? Well, that's what I'll be showing you all today. I'll be using Let's Resin's epoxy, and this is a question I get often when I've done open bezel projects. I thought it's about time I finally showed you the answer, which is yes, you can. You just need a little patience. I'm also going to be trying this Mateo glittery mica that I just bought from Amazon. It looks super pretty and sparkly. And yeah, let's get to making these bezels. So when it comes to these open bezels, you definitely don't need much resin. I'm mixing up 2 ounces of epoxy, 1 ounce of each part, and it's because it's the minimum I personally like to mix to make sure my resin mixes properly, but I doubt I'll even use an ounce for the 5 bezels I'm going to be making. Maybe if I also include the epoxy I'll be using to top coat these, it will equal to an ounce, but don't worry, I do have another project planned for the rest of this resin, which you'll see soon. Now, I will be keeping these bezels simple. I'm only going to be mixing my epoxy with the glittery mica I just showed you in the intro. I probably will also add a couple of stickers to some of these bezels for fun, but the point of this video is to show you bezels being done with epoxy. I will be running this resin through my air bubble remover since I've gotten quite a lot of air bubbles into this resin, and while that's going, I'm going to prep my bezels. Just like if I was filling these with UV resin, I'm going to be putting these bezels onto resin tape. I'm using Let's Resin's resin tape, which, by the way, of all the resin tapes I've used, this one has been the best one because it doesn't leave any sticky residue behind on the backs of the bezels. I'm not so sure if it'll be the same with epoxy resin, but I guess that's another thing we'll be finding out together in this video. A quick little tip for you when you're using resin tape is to fold the ends on itself like I just did, and that way, if you need to move the whole thing around, all you have to do is grab a hold of the folded edges, and then you're not struggling with the tape sticking to your gloves. And now comes the crucial step for bezels, making sure the tape is stuck on the bezels properly so that we don't get any leaks. I like to use a popsicle stick to gently but firmly press the tape and bezel into each other. I usually just quickly do both sides, but since I'm using epoxy today, since epoxy takes a while to cure, for extra measure, I will do one final press with my fingers, and then all I can do is hope for the best. So up next, it's time to dye this resin. I'm going to take the amount of epoxy I need. Again, I have less than an ounce here, and I'm going to mix in this glittery mica powder. I've never actually tried Mateo mica powders before, but I have heard good things. Oh, isn't that just so pretty? The funny thing about this one is it's called Diamond Dazzling, and if you recall, one of my favorite mica powders is called Dazzling Diamond, so this is a little bit funny, and they both do look very similar too, so magnifying glass emoji. But I don't mind if they are the same though, because it does seem I can't buy the Dazzling Diamond in Canada anymore, which completely stinks. Anyways, while I mix this resin up and pour it into my bezels, let's talk about the practicality about filling open bezels with epoxy instead of UV resin. As someone who prefers and advocates for epoxy resin over UV resin, this is definitely a UV resin craft. Open bezels are just so small and don't hold that much resin, so it's hard to justify mixing up epoxy specifically for them. Plus, with epoxy taking so long to cure, it's also hard to justify the risk of the bezels leaking. Doing these with UV resin is so much less of a hassle and a lot less time consuming. I'm pretty sure in the time I'm going to have to wait for these 5 bezels to fully cure, I could probably get a couple of hundred done with UV resin. Now, don't get me wrong, there is use for epoxy and open bezels. I think especially if you're wanting to fill it with black resin or other dark opaque colors, I would probably recommend you do it with epoxy since it can be tricky to cure opaque UV resin, but in the end, I guess it just does come down to personal preference and whether or not you're willing to wait for epoxy to cure. So now that these are filled, I'm going to cross my fingers and let this resin cure. It's been about 45 minutes since I poured this resin, and I just want to quickly check that there's no leaks. And everything looks good. This looks promising, so I'm going to cover these back up, and hopefully the next clip will be me pulling these off the tape. It's now the next day, and I'm happy to report I got no leakages. So I'm going to pull these off the tape, and I will also check whether or not the tape residue transferred to the backs of these. Just look at that shimmer. Now, as I was handling these, I couldn't feel any stickiness with my gloves, but I'm just going to quickly touch this to my skin. And no, it's not sticky. The tape residue didn't transfer, so that's great. Okay, I have decided to add a sticker to a few of these. I have these 3 daisy focus stickers that I cut out from a bigger rub-on sticker I had, and because I want to show you me top coating these also with epoxy, I really want to do these fully with epoxy. I thought it would be easier to see that layer being put on with the sticker in the way. I am putting the sticker on the side that the epoxy touched the resin tape since it's flat and leveled with the bezel. The other side, which was the top, is slightly domed, and when it comes to putting a top coat on resin, the flatter the cured resin is, the easier it will be and less likely for the resin to run off the edges. Once I'm done putting this last sticker on, I will be trimming these stickers down a little because they are slightly too big, but I'll do this off camera. All right, it's time to top coat. I did trim down the stickers. I ended up having to change one of the stickers completely because my tool got carried away. So now I'm going to pour a little bit of this resin on each of them to give us a nice layer which is going to seal in these stickers and give these bezels a beautiful gloss. Now, one thing I do want to mention for anyone who wants to try doing bezels with epoxy is that there are a couple of ways to speed up the process. For starters, you could use a 4-hour cure epoxy resin. That one would have actually been perfect for what I've done today since I didn't really need much work time. Another way could be to use a heating mat or a curing machine if you have one. I didn't use any of those today because I know not everyone has them, and I personally also wanted the little challenge. Now I'm going to cover these up and let this resin cure. This top coat is cured now. I went ahead and put a couple on necklaces. As for the others, I might put them on key rings, but there you have it, my friends. Open bezels being filled with epoxy resin. It's definitely a lot faster done with UV resin, but it can be done with epoxy. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you've learned something. If you did, then please smash the like button and please share this video with a fellow resin friend. If you'd like to see other resin videos I've done, then be sure to check out one of these videos next. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!